Each of these phones has one feature that they're the best at. The Pixel 7 Pro takes stunning photos at night. The iPhone 14 Pro has a 48 megapixel RAW mode that's unmatched, and the S23 Ultra, nobody can beat its portrait mode. So I decided to take the Nothing Phone 2 and put it head to head with the best. I'm Becca, welcome back to Full Frame. The Nothing Phone 2 uses a 50 megapixel Sony IMX890 sensor, and thanks to a new and improved processor, Nothing claims that the camera can take the data from 8 different frames and merge them together for better HDR performance. Photos are a bit slow to process, but once they're done, boom, HDR and a fair amount of it. The photos are loaded with detail and have a nice focus fall off when the subject is close to the lens. The colors are vivid and the white balance is consistently accurate. And when you compare them to the iPhone 14 Pro's main lens, you quickly see just how much time was put into making its color science match. The shots are almost impossible to tell apart, and more often than not, the Phone 2 is doing just a bit more sharpening that makes for a clearer image. The Nothing Phone 2 is also great at recognizing faces and produces a nice subtle focus fall off. I'm very impressed by the main lens in perfect light. For more detail, you can also toggle on a 50 megapixel output. I love taking 48 megapixel photos on the iPhone. They take a bit longer to process, but the level of detail, especially when viewing on a larger screen or if you were to print them, is noticeable. So I'm really stoked that Nothing included a 50 megapixel output on the Phone 2. The problem is, if you're shooting outside of expert mode, Nothing bakes in loads of contrast, saturation, and sharpening. And quite frankly, there just isn't that much detail actually there. For example, I know what these petals feel like by looking at the iPhone's photo. And I can't say the same about the Phone 2s. But for the folks who don't want large file sizes and won't bother with higher resolution photos, the Phone 2 is holding its own in good light. Where both the iPhone and the Phone 2 don't have the edge though, is at night. The Pixel 7 Pro continues to impress me in low light. Its main f1.85 50 megapixel sensor produces vivid images with great contrast. But the astrophotography mode is the most impressive part, with a 4-minute exposure time that can produce 1-second time-lapse alongside stunning photos. But without an astro mode, and with the longest amount of time it will leave its shutter open at only 2 seconds, the Phone 2 produces underexposed images at night, when compared to the Pixel. And sometimes this does work in the phone's favor. Because the shutter doesn't stay open very long, it captured a less blurry photo here. But in this photo, there are absolutely no details in the shadows. None of these images are bad. In fact, I really like how the Phone 2 utilized its HDR abilities to bring the sky up and the clock face down in this photo. But more so than not, the Pixel is able to capture more light and therefore create a more vivid and interesting photo at night. I also hate that the level feature continues to vibrate when the phone is exposing for a scene at night. This can't be helping to keep the camera steady. When I take photos of people, I always try portrait mode first, and the S23 Ultra continues to have the best cutout for people and pets. Match that with its f1.7 200 megapixel main lens, and even in low light, portrait photos, they blow the Phone 2 out of the water. In better light, the S23 Ultra produces a more natural focus fall off, where the Phone 2 feels like it's just slapping a big blur on everything but the subject. The cutoff is pretty passable though, and with some tuning or maybe a depth sensor in the next generation phone, I think there's a lot of hope for this system. For now though, this camera doesn't hold up to the king of portrait mode, the S23 Ultra. This is probably a good time to mention that there is no telephoto lens on the Phone 2. Instead, the main camera's 50 megapixel sensor is cropped for a 2x mode, and the camera can digitally zoom all the way up to 10x, but holding the camera steady enough to achieve the framing you desire at 10x is frustratingly hard. Plus, the results are so bad. Nothing told me that the physical design was prioritized in Phone 2, and that adding a dedicated telephoto lens would have led to a larger camera bump. But despite the company insisting that the main sensor was perfectly capable of providing zoomed-in photos, the Phone 2's 2x mode is simply not as good as having a dedicated telephoto lens, like on the iPhone or the Pixel. And it is especially not as impressive when compared to the S23 Ultra's 10 megapixel f4.9 periscope lens that is natively 10x optically zoomed. You lose the compression of an image, the most important part about a telephoto lens, when you simply crop a sensor, which is why Samsung and Google, and maybe Apple soon, utilize a periscope optical train that allows the lens to be longer without increasing the size of the camera bump. I really hope Nothing can work something similar into the design in the next generation. There's one other lens on the Phone 2. It's the 50 megapixel ultra-wide with an 114 degree field of view. It's all the same hardware as the ultrawide in phone 1, but because of a new processor, it can process more data for a better result in high contrast scenarios. And at f2.2, it's punchy and it is really wide. But quickly you'll notice just how distorted the edges are. So I fought with my producer Viren about this level of distortion being a good or a bad thing. Personally, I use the ultrawide lens to take photos of groups of friends instead of using the selfie cam. So I don't want that much distortion for the folks on the outer edge of the frame. Viren, on the other hand, thinks that an ultrawide should be just that, ultra-wide, and with that comes a level of distortion. So what do you think? Choose wisely. Both the iPhone and Pixel have much better lens correction that I enjoy, but it comes at the cost of a slightly tighter image. I also just found that the ultra-wide wasn't as sharp as photos from the Pixel and iPhone. This is another place you can see just how much effort was put into the main lens and not so much other features of this camera. So nothing has created a very capable main camera in the Phone 2 for the very competitive price of $600. And there are added bonuses like being able to use the glyph lights as a fill light, or the red line that gently blinks on the back of the phone when it's recording video. But as a smaller, relatively new company, it's clear only so much effort could be put into the whole system. And it certainly feels like most of that energy was funneled into the main lens. So the company's credit, it's crafted a very capable, sharp, and dynamic camera there. But when it comes to the photos at night, or features such as portrait mode, there's more work to be done. And if nothing could put effort into those areas in Phone 3, it's really gonna shine. I don't think this is a gimmick. I think that the glyph lights are actually really, really cool and really useful, and I really miss LED notification lights, so more of this. More lights on phones, please. Less ringtones, less buzzing, more light shows.